You owe someone money right now. Maybe rent, maybe a card, maybe a favor you have not paid back yet. It feels personal. It feels modern. It is not. Debt is older than money, older than coins, older than kings. And the first debts in human history were not polite. Long before anyone melted metal into coins, people in ancient Mesopotamia were already keeping track of who owed what. Mesopotamia sat in the region we now call Iraq, between two rivers, where some of the first cities on earth were built. And in those cities, priests and officials pressed marks into wet clay, then baked it hard. Those clay tablets were not poems. They were receipts. This grain is owed. This many animals are owed. This many days of labor are owed. That sounds simple. It was not, because once a debt exists, someone has power over someone else. And in the ancient world, that power could take almost anything. Picture a farmer after a bad harvest. The rains failed. The grain ran short. But the temple or the palace still expected its share, because temples and palaces were the ancient version of a bank and a government combined. They stored the surplus grain, they lent it out, and they expected it back, usually with more added on top. If the farmer could not pay, the debt did not disappear. It grew. And if it grew large enough, the farmer's own family could be taken as payment. A wife, a child, sometimes the farmer himself, forced to work off the debt with his own body and time. This was not rare. Many historians who study the ancient Near East, including economist and Assyriologist Michael Hudson, have pointed to cuneiform records showing that debt bondage was common across early Mesopotamian city-states. People were not just poor, they were owned, temporarily or permanently, because of numbers written on clay. Wait, before money even existed as we understand it, people were already going into debt slavery over grain? Yes, debt came first. Coins came later. Money was not invented to make life easier. In many ways, it was invented to make debt easier to measure, track, and enforce. Then, everything changed, at least for a while. Some ancient rulers understood a dangerous truth. If debt was allowed to grow forever, eventually most of the population would be enslaved to a small number of lenders. An entire kingdom could collapse into a society of masters and debt slaves, with almost no free farmers left to work the land, fight in armies, or pay future taxes. So some kings did something that sounds almost unthinkable today. They canceled the debts. Historians studying ancient Sumerian and Babylonian records have found evidence of rulers issuing what are sometimes called clean slate decrees. Certain debts were wiped out. Enslaved debtors were freed. Land that had been seized was returned to its original families. This did not happen constantly, and scholars still debate how often it truly occurred or how completely it was enforced. But the pattern shows up again and again across different centuries and different rulers. Why would a king erase debts owed to his own wealthy citizens? Because an economy made entirely of masters and slaves is fragile. A ruler needs soldiers. He needs farmers who still own land and still have a reason to defend it. If everyone is in debt bondage, a kingdom becomes weak from the inside, no matter how strong its walls are. The problem was, the cancellation never lasted. Trade continued. Bad harvests continued. Lenders continued lending because lending was profitable, and some borrowers continued falling behind because life is unpredictable. Within a generation or two, the same cycle of debt, seizure, and bondage would build up again until another ruler eventually canceled it once more. Debt was not a one-time problem. It was a repeating pressure built into how these early economies worked. And this is where the story gets darker, because debt was never only about grain or coins. It was about control. A lender did not simply want repayment. A lender wanted leverage. Someone who owes you something will show up when you call. They will work when you tell them to work. They will hesitate before disagreeing with you. This is why many historians argue that early debt systems were not just economic tools. They were tools of social order. Kings taxed people, but private lenders quietly built their own smaller kingdoms of obligation, one loan at a time. Sound familiar? Modern debt does not usually end in literal slavery, but the underlying pressure has not disappeared. People still stay in jobs they dislike because of what they owe. People still delay major life decisions, like starting a family or changing careers, because of financial obligations hanging over them. The chains are no longer visible, but the discomfort of feeling controlled by what you owe is strikingly similar to what was recorded on clay thousands of years ago. Anthropologist David Graeber, in his research on the deep history of debt, argued that owing money has always carried a moral weight far heavier than a simple accounting number. Many cultures across history treated an unpaid debt as a kind of personal failure, almost a stain on someone's character, not just a missing payment. That emotional weight, Graeber suggested, may be one of the oldest and most persistent psychological tools ever used to control human behavior. Think about how much of modern life still runs on that same emotional weight. Credit scores, student loans, mortgages stretching 30 years into the future. We call it normal. We call it responsible. But the emotional pressure driving it, the fear of owing something you cannot repay, is not new. It may be one of the oldest fears human societies ever built into their economies on purpose. The ancient clean slate decrees eventually faded from use as economies grew larger and more complex, and record-keeping shifted from temples and palaces toward more decentralized trade, and eventually coined money. Once money could move quickly between many hands, it became far harder for any single ruler to simply cancel every debt at once. So the pressure remained. It simply changed shape. No more clay tablets, no more temple granaries. Now it is interest rates, due dates, and a small glowing number on a screen that tells you exactly how far behind or ahead you are. The tool changed. The feeling did not. You do not owe a temple grain today, but somewhere, right now, you are almost certainly carrying some version of the same ancient pressure, a debt of your own, quietly shaping decisions you make every single day. You owe someone money right now. That has always been true, for almost everyone, for thousands of years. The only real difference is that today, no one is coming to write it on clay. But maybe that is exactly why debt became so powerful. Clay can break, a tablet can be lost, a palace can burn, an empire can collapse. But the idea of debt survives all of it, because debt does not really live in clay, paper, or a banking app. It lives in the future. The moment you borrow something, part of your future no longer belongs entirely to you. Some of your future paycheck already has a destination. Some of your future hours are already promised to someone else. Some of your future choices become smaller before you have even made them. That is the real power of debt. It does not just take money from you today. It can take freedom from you tomorrow. A person with no debt can quit a bad job more easily. They can move. They can take risks. They can say no. A person buried under payments has to think differently. Can I afford to leave? Can I survive one missed paycheck? Can I start over? Can I make this decision? Or do I need to keep doing what I am doing because the bill is due next week? And that is why debt has always been more than a financial tool. It shapes behavior. In ancient Mesopotamia, debt could force a farmer into labor. Today, debt can force someone to keep working 60 hours a week in a job they hate. In the ancient world, a bad harvest could trap an entire family. Today, one emergency can do something similar. A medical bill, a car repair, a lost job, a rent increase, a single month where everything goes wrong at once. The details are different. The pressure is not. And to be clear, debt is not always evil. A loan can help someone buy a home. It can help a student get an education. It can help a business survive long enough to grow. Debt can build things, but debt becomes dangerous when people stop seeing it as a tool and start treating it like a normal way of life. Because lenders make money when borrowing continues. Banks do not want everyone to pay off every loan tomorrow. Credit card companies do not make profits from people who never carry a balance. Entire industries are built around the idea that you will owe something, somewhere, for a very long time. That does not make every lender evil. It just means their goal is not the same as yours. Your goal is freedom. Their goal is repayment. And those two goals can quietly pull you in opposite directions for years. Maybe that is the oldest lesson hidden inside those broken clay tablets. The people of Mesopotamia were not stupid. They understood debt. They understood interest. They understood that a society where too many people owed too much could eventually destroy itself. Thousands of years later, we still understand that feeling. We just call it by different names. Minimum payment, monthly installment, buy now, pay later, credit limit, interest rate. But underneath all of those modern words is the same ancient message. You borrowed from tomorrow. Now, tomorrow belongs to someone else. And maybe the most valuable thing you can do is not just ask how much you owe. Maybe you should ask what that debt is costing you beyond money. Your time, your choices, your sleep, your ability to walk away. Because debt is older than money, older than coins, older than kings. And even now, thousands of years after the first person pressed a debt into wet clay, it is still shaping the way humans live.